The dimly lit Italian restaurant was almost empty, casting long shadows that danced along the walls as the flicker of candlelight illuminated the polished wooden tables. In one corner, a tall man sat alone, his sharp features outlined by the soft glow. He was known in the underworld as the Italian Mafia boss, a figure shrouded in both fear and respect. His demeanor was cold, his presence commanding, yet in this moment of solitude, he found himself entrapped in an introspective silence that felt heavier than the weight of the gold chain around his neck. Before we turn the page, we're nearly at 1,000 subscribers. If intense love stories stay with you, subscribe and stay. Let's continue. Every sip of the deep red wine tasted like regret, flooding his mind with memories of choices made, lives changed, and the loneliness that accompanied his power. The restaurant was a refuge, a place where he could escape the relentless demands of his empire, if only for a while. Yet as he savored the complex flavors of the wine, nostalgia began to seep in, reminding him of the life he left behind, the family connections he sacrificed, and the friendships that faded into oblivion. It was a bittersweet moment, one that he had grown accustomed to, yet still felt the pang of longing for something beyond the cold steel of loyalty and revenge. Suddenly, the tranquility was shattered by a commotion near the entrance. A woman's voice, raised in distress, pierced the air like a siren. He turned his gaze towards the source of the commotion, and his heart raced as he saw her, the woman who would pull him from his reverie. She was cornered by 3 rough-looking men, their intentions clear as they loomed over her with predatory smiles and aggressive body language. Something within him stirred, an instinct he didn't recognize, as he observed the way she held her ground, her chin tilted defiantly despite the fear evident in her eyes. The boss could feel a magnetic pull toward her, an inexplicable connection that forced him to rise from his seat. It was more than just a desire to protect. It was a sense of kinship, an understanding that transcended their starkly different worlds. His life had been shaped by violent choices, yet here stood a woman who embodied resilience and strength, a stark contrast to the shadows that enveloped his existence. He couldn't pinpoint why he felt so compelled to intervene, but the inkling of morality that seldom surfaced in his heart began to whisper. As he approached, the tension in the restaurant thickened. The patrons, wary of the impending confrontation, shifted uneasily in their seats. The 3 men, clearly intoxicated by bravado rather than alcohol, eyed him with a mix of recognition and defiance. They had heard the tales of the boss, the man who could command the tide of fate with mere words and a concealed gesture. A hush fell over the room, anticipation crackling in the air as he stepped closer, his dark eyes fixed on the woman. "Leave her alone," he said, his voice low yet authoritative, slicing through the murmur of uncertainty that enveloped the space. The men hesitated, exchanging glances, measuring the risk of challenging a figure of his stature. The atmosphere shifted, the air laden with the unsaid, a mixture of fear and curiosity. The woman looked at him, her eyes wide, a flicker of hope igniting amidst her apprehension. She took a small step back, creating a distance between herself and her aggressors, her gaze now locked onto the boss. It was as if in that moment, she sensed that he was her unlikely savior. One of the men, emboldened by the alcohol and arrogance, stepped forward. "You think you can just waltz in here and play the hero?" he sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. "This isn't your business, old man. Walk away if you know what's good for you." But the boss remained unfazed, his expression hardening like granite, a mask that had been perfected over years of navigating a dangerous world. "Your kind doesn't understand the consequences of your actions," he replied, his voice calm, yet the underlying authority was palpable. As he spoke, he could see the woman's shoulders relax slightly. The confrontation unfolded without violence, the tension diffused as he effortlessly commanded respect from the trio. They could sense the turning tide, the balance of power shifting in ways they had not anticipated. The standoff ended as the men reevaluated their chances, finally backing down with begrudging reluctance. With their tails between their legs, they retreated, leaving behind a silence that felt heavy with relief. The woman exhaled deeply, her eyes visibly glistening as she turned to him. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly, reflecting a mix of gratitude and uncertainty. "Are you all right?" he asked, genuinely concerned, as he took a moment to assess her. She was resilient, yet he could see the aftershocks of fear ripple through her. There was something about her, a spark that intrigued him, igniting a curiosity he hadn't felt in years. It was a vulnerability that contrasted sharply with the world he knew, where emotions were often buried beneath layers of toughness and bravado. "I am now," she replied, a faint smile breaking through her initial wariness. "My name is Isabella. I didn't think anyone would come to help." The connection between them formed in that brief exchange, promising uncharted paths ahead. The boss felt a flicker of something he hadn't allowed himself to feel for years: hope. "I'm Antonio," he said, the name hanging in the air like an unspoken promise. "And I don't plan on letting anyone harm you again." If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to the channel for more. As their conversation continued, the restaurant, once a backdrop for solitude, transformed into a crossroads of fate. In that dimly lit haven, the seeds of an unforeseen bond were sown, intertwining their fates in ways neither could fully comprehend yet. As the boss stepped closer, he could see the woman's body language shift from defensive to hesitant hope. Isabella, with her striking features and fierce spirit, was caught in the web of uncertainty that had been spun around her. The tension that filled the restaurant was palpable as the remaining patrons held their breath, each person acutely aware that they were witnessing a moment that could change everything. Isabella, despite the fear that had gripped her moments ago, stood her ground. Her chin lifted slightly, defiance flickering in her bright green eyes. She was no stranger to conflict, yet the men who had cornered her were not amateurs. They had underestimated her grit, an error that might cost them more than they realized. Antonio noted the shift within her. She was resilient, and there was a strength to her that intrigued him. "Let's not make this any worse than it needs to be," he said, his voice steady and low, projecting an air of calm authority. "You're making a mistake." The words were directed not just at the men, but also at her. He could sense the delicate balance of power shifting, and the fear that had threatened to swallow her whole began to dissipate, if only slightly. The trio exchanged wary glances, their expressions wavering between bravado and the fear of crossing a line that should not be crossed. Antonio's reputation preceded him, and although he preferred to operate in the shadows, tonight he found himself stepping into the light, compelled by the need to protect this woman. She reminded him of a time when he had not yet felt the heavy hand of the choices he made. "Who do you think you are?" one of the men barked, taking a step forward, the bravado in his voice a thin veneer over the fear hidden in his eyes. "This is none of your business." "Oh, it's very much my business," Antonio replied, his voice unwavering. "If you wish to leave here in one piece, I suggest you take that attitude elsewhere." The tension in the air thickened, almost suffocating, as the boss's calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the aggressive posturing of the men. Isabella's eyes flicked between Antonio and her aggressors, sensing the fight or flight response welling up within her. At that moment, she found her voice, steadying herself. "I can handle this," she insisted, though Antonio could hear the slight tremor that betrayed her bravado. "You don't have to interfere." Yet, deep down, she recognized that she did need help. Antonio took a step forward, closing the distance between them, his gaze softening as he focused on her. "No one should have to handle threats alone. You're worth more than that. And I won't let them intimidate you." The nuances in his words seemed to penetrate her fear, igniting something within her. Isabella felt seen, for perhaps the first time in a long while. There was a depth to his eyes that spoke of understanding and shared burdens. She nodded slowly, her resolve strengthening as she stood beside him, ready to confront the reality of the situation together. As the men hesitated, unsure of how to proceed, Antonio seized the opportunity. "Think carefully about what you're doing here. You may be brave in numbers, but you're foolish to assume you can threaten a woman in my presence." Finally, the trio recoiled, realizing they had underestimated the gravity of the encounter. The tension snapped, and they backed down, retreating from the confrontation with their bravado shattered. With one last glare cast over their shoulders, they exited the restaurant, leaving behind an air of relieved silence. The patrons began to murmur, the whispers of their disbelief mingling with the muted clinking of silverware resuming its rhythm. Isabella turned to Antonio, her heart still racing but her expression transforming into something softer. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't think anyone would come to help. Sometimes people just need to be shown that kindness still exists," Antonio replied, his tone genuine. "Are you all right?" The question held more weight than its simple wording suggested. He studied her closely, noting the remnants of fear etched across her features, even as her confidence began to resurface. There was a flicker of realization within him. He was drawn to her resilience, and for the first time in years, the weight of his choices seemed lighter in her presence. "I think so," she replied, a hint of emotion breaking through. "I'm Isabella. Antonio," he introduced himself, his brow arching slightly as he offered a reassuring smile. "And I don't plan on letting anyone harm you again. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to the channel for more." Their conversation continued, the atmosphere in the restaurant shifting from one of peril to tentative friendship. In that brief moment, amidst the flickering candlelight, something unspoken ignited between them, a connection birthed from adversity and survival. As they stood in the warm glow of the restaurant, the outside world faded into a distant hum. This chance encounter within the dimly lit confines of a seemingly ordinary evening had laid the foundation for an extraordinary journey. Little did they know, their lives were now intertwined in ways that would challenge everything they believed about power, choice, and the very essence of humanity itself. Isabella and Antonio began to traverse the uncertain landscape of their newfound connection, every shared moment layered with unspoken tension and underlying fear. With each encounter, their bond deepened, forged in the fires of adversity. The bustling streets of the city felt claustrophobic, yet oddly liberating, as if they were the only two souls navigating a world designed to keep them apart. They found solace not just in each other's presence, but in the shared understanding of what lay beneath the surface of their lives. Days turned into nights, and the shadows of danger loomed closer with every passing moment. Together, they faced difficult circumstances that demanded trust and reliance on one another. Antonio, once a man accustomed to solitude, found his heart shifting, bound by an unexpected affection that bloomed in the most unlikely of gardens. Isabella, having endured her own trials, felt a flicker of hope ignite within her, a hope that had long since been extinguished by the harsh realities of her life. One evening, they met at a small cafe tucked away in a quiet alley, where the sound of laughter floated from inside, but outside remained serene. The moon cast a silver glow, illuminating Isabella's features, making her look ethereal. As they sat across from one another, a comfortable silence enveloped them, occasionally broken by the distant sounds of the city. Antonio stirred his coffee, contemplating the weight of their situations. "Why did you get involved?" Isabella asked suddenly, her gaze piercing through the veil of his stoicism. "You could have walked away. Those men, they were nothing to you." For a moment, he was caught off guard. Antonio had always been meticulous about his choices. Every action had a motive. But there was something about Isabella that prompted him to spill his guarded thoughts. "I suppose I've been walking away from too much for too long," he admitted, his voice low but steady. "It's easy to let fear dictate your actions when you're in a position of power, but sometimes it takes a threat to awaken a sense of humanity." Isabella's heart ached at his words, recognizing the truth behind them. She felt a surge of gratitude mixed with something deeper, like a thread weaving their lives closer together. "I understand," she replied softly. "Fear can become a prison." Their conversation drifted between past hurts and fragile hopes, a delicate dance of vulnerability. With each word exchanged, they carved out a space where neither was judged for their choices. Isabella shared her struggles, revealing snippets of her life that had led her to this point, a life of survival against the odds, marred by difficult decisions and sacrifices made in the name of protection. Antonio listened, his heart heavy with empathy for her plight. "I never wanted this life," she confessed, her voice trembling as she struggled to maintain her composure. But sometimes we don't get to choose our paths. We just exist. That existence can feel suffocating, Antonio replied, his tone thick with understanding. But perhaps it's not about the path we choose, but how we navigate it. Isabella looked at him, realizing how rare it was to find someone willing to see beyond the surface, a person willing to delve into the depths of their shared pain. And in that realization, she found a flicker of hope for something beyond survival, a sense of belonging. Yet, even within this burgeoning relationship, an undercurrent of danger persisted. Antonio couldn't shake the feeling that they were both standing on the edge of a precipice. Each day brought new threats from those who sought to undermine him, and his loyalty to the Mafia still loomed heavily over their heads, casting shadows over their moments together. "I want to protect you," he said suddenly, almost as if it were an afterthought. "But I'm afraid of what that means." Isabella's brow furrowed, the weight of his confession settling between them. "What do you mean? Being involved with me puts you in danger. I can't promise you safety when my life is a continuous cycle of violence and loyalty. I don't want you to become another casualty of my choices." She reached across the table, her fingers brushing against his hand, a gesture both tender and grounding. "You're not just some monster, Antonio. You're more than that." "I see it in you." He lifted his gaze, caught off guard by her unwavering strength. "And what if I lose control? What if this darkness takes over me? I've seen what it does to people." "You're not defined by your past," Isabella said firmly, her eyes glimmering with conviction. "You have the power to choose differently." "We both do." Antonio felt the weight of her words sink in that moment. He understood that their connection was more than a fleeting encounter. It was a lifeline. They were bound by a shared understanding of choice, sacrifice, and the necessity of stepping into the light amidst overwhelming darkness. "Let's not just survive," Isabella urged. "Let's fight to live." A smile broke through the tension that had enveloped him, filling him with warmth he hadn't realized he needed. "I'll fight for you, Isabella. I will." If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to like this video to support our content. The air between them crackled with unspoken promises and the realization that they both stood at a crossroads, not just in their relationship, but in their lives. Bound by shared experiences and forged in adversity, Antonio felt a renewed sense of purpose, and Isabella found the strength to hope again. As they left the cafe, the unforgiving reality of their world awaited them outside. But together, they could face whatever came their way. They had chosen to fight against the darkness and for the light that flickered between them, a light that might just illuminate a path toward redemption. Antonio sat in his dimly lit office, the weight of his impending decision pressing heavily on his chest. The walls, adorned with shadows, echoed the silence he perpetually carried. He had always been a man of resolve, making choices that reverberated through the lives of those around him. But this time, as he replayed the conversation with Isabella in his mind, a flicker of doubt gnawed at him. Her strength was undeniable, yet the world they inhabited was ruthless, unforgiving, a reality he could not shield her from. The ultimatum had come from his organization, the unyielding mafia that thrived on loyalty and blood. "Choose, Antonio," they had said, their voices steady, their gazes cold. "Your position, your power, or her." The stakes had never felt higher, and the implications of his choice were etched vividly in his thoughts. He could almost feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating, as he weighed the costs of loyalty against the burgeoning affection he felt for Isabella. As he turned to the window, the world outside seemed oblivious to his turmoil. The city pulsed with life, people moving through their days without a thought to the struggles that silently bound him. He could hear laughter and the distant sound of music wafting in from a nearby bar, a stark contrast to the quiet despair within his heart. In that moment, he realized that his decisions would not just define his future, they would alter the course of Isabella's life as well. The memory of Isabella's eyes haunted him. They were filled with a resilience that captivated him, yet also bore the weight of her own burdens. He had seen her vulnerability, the flickers of fear behind her composed exterior. It was a reminder that she, too, was caught in a web of choices not entirely hers to make. Antonio leaned back in his chair, raking his fingers through his hair, frustration welling up inside him. "What am I supposed to do?" he muttered to himself, his voice barely a whisper. He recalled how she had spoken of survival, of fighting against the darkness that threatened to swallow her whole. She had inspired him to consider a life beyond the chains of his existence. "We can change our paths," she had said, her voice steady with conviction. But was that even a possibility for someone like him? The thought filled him with dread. His life had been a string of decisions made under duress, and to disrupt that order felt dangerously reckless. Suddenly, the door creaked open, disrupting his thoughts. Isabella stepped inside, her presence illuminating the room with an unexpected warmth. She looked at him, a mixture of concern and determination written across her face. "Antonio, we need to talk," she said, her voice unwavering yet soft. He nodded, gesturing for her to take a seat. The air between them crackled with unspoken tension as she settled into the chair opposite him. "I've been thinking about your situation," she began, her eyes searching his. "I know the ultimatum they've given you. I can't imagine how difficult that must be." Antonio could feel the lump forming in his throat as her words pierced through the silence. "You deserve safety, Isabella," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But I don't know if I can give that to you without sacrificing everything I've built." "That's not what I want," she replied passionately. "I don't want you to give up your life for me, but I also can't stand by and watch you be consumed by it. You have the power to choose your own fate. Don't let them take that from you." Her conviction made his heart race, a spark igniting within him. Those words held a truth he desperately wanted to believe. "I've spent my life making decisions that benefit others, my family, my organization. It's all I know. But if I choose you, it could mean losing everything. Maybe losing everything isn't such a bad thing if you finally have the chance to live," she countered, her gaze never wavering. "I want to fight for us, Antonio. I want to fight for a life where we can define our own choices." His heart pounded in response, the weight of her words hanging heavy in the air. "What if my choice leads to more darkness?" "I don't want to drag you down with me." Isabella reached across the table, her hand resting gently on his. "You're not a monster. You're a man who's been shaped by harsh circumstances, but I see the good in you. I believe in your ability to choose differently." Antonio's breath caught in his throat, the warmth of her touch igniting something within him, hope, fear, longing. The flicker of possibility danced in the air around them. "But what about the consequences?" he whispered, his voice trembling. "Every choice has consequences," she replied, her voice steady. "But living in fear of those consequences will only keep us trapped. You have the chance to break free from the cycle, Antonio. Don't let it slip away." Tension filled the room as he contemplated her words. The weight of the Mafia's demands loomed large in his mind, but Isabella's unwavering belief in him began to chip away at his doubts. "I want to protect you," he said, his voice almost breaking. "But I fear that by doing so, I may end up hurting you instead." "Then let me help you carry that burden," she said, her resolve unyielding. "We can face this together. You don't have to make this choice alone. I'm here for you." As they sat in that quiet room, something shifted between them. The air was thick with the resonance of shared pain and the hope of something more. A decision was forming within him, one that would shatter the silence they had both lived in for far too long. His heart raced as he realized that perhaps, just perhaps, he could forge a new path, one that embraced both love and the fight for freedom. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to like this video to support our content. Antonio took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment settle upon him. It was a moment ripe with potential and fraught with danger, but for the first time in a long while, he felt a flicker of hope ignite within him. A hope that together, they could navigate the darkness and emerge into the light. Antonio stood frozen in the dimly lit room, his heart racing as he wrestled with the enormous weight of his decision. The air was thick with tension, filled with the echoes of their conversation lingering like a ghost. Isabella's words replayed in his mind, haunting him with their implications. "You have the power to choose your own fate. Don't let them take that from you." He had always defined himself by the choices he made for others, but could he now choose for himself? He looked at Isabella, her expression a mix of determination and concern, as if she were peering deep into his soul. Antonio, we need to decide what comes next. We can't keep running. Her voice broke through his thoughts, grounding him in the moment. She was right. They could no longer exist in the shadows, waiting for something to change. The ultimatum from his organization loomed over them like a storm cloud, threatening to collapse their fragile beginnings. I can't just walk away from everything I've built, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. His hands clenched into fists, betraying his internal struggle. If I choose you, it means turning my back on my family, my people. They won't let that go easily. The idea of betrayal sent chills down his spine. The very concept of abandoning those who had stood by him felt like a betrayal of his very identity. Maybe it's time to redefine what family means, she replied, her gaze unwavering. Your loyalty should be to yourself and to those who truly care for you, not to a system that demands your submission. Her words were a lifeline, pulling him back from the edge of despair. Antonio took a deep breath, searching for the strength within him. But what if my choice leads to more darkness? I don't want to drag you down with me. His voice trembled as fear gnawed at him, a persistent reminder of the life he had led. He was a man molded by his past, a past that was far from forgiving. Then let me help you carry that burden, she said, her voice steady and filled with resolve. We'll face whatever comes together. You don't have to make this choice alone. The assurance in her words pierced through the darkness that threatened to envelop him. He reached for her hand, their fingers intertwining. A silent pact formed in that moment. They were bound not just by circumstance, but by an understanding that transcended the violence and chaos surrounding them. Antonio felt the warmth of her skin against his, reminding him that he was still capable of feeling something genuine in a world that had turned cold. As the silence stretched between them, he could feel the gravity of the moment. The weight of the decision he had to make felt insurmountable, but with Isabella by his side, it became a little less daunting. What if, he hesitated, searching for the right words, what if I choose to leave it all behind? The thought echoed in his mind, a wild notion that had never seemed possible until now. She smiled softly, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. Then we'll forge a new path together. It won't be easy, but it will be ours. Her conviction fueled the flicker of hope igniting within him. He longed for a life unshackled from the chains of his past, a life where choices were his to make. Yet doubt crept back in, relentless and insidious. And what about them? He asked, his voice heavy with the weight of countless lives intertwined with his own. What if they come after us? The thought of retaliation sent a shiver down his spine. The Mafia was not known for its mercy. Then we face them together, Isabella responded, her grip tightening around his hand. You've always been strong, Antonio. You've survived this long for a reason. Her faith in him was both comforting and terrifying. His mind raced as he weighed the consequences of his potential choice. With every second, the stakes grew higher. The Mafia's grip was tightening, and the walls seemed to close in. I can't be the man who lets fear dictate his life any longer, he murmured, more to himself than her. It was a realization that felt monumental. Isabella leaned closer, her voice a mere whisper. You're not just a man of the Mafia, you're more than your past. You have the power to change your story. Her words resonated, striking at the heart of his turmoil. In that moment, he envisioned a life where he could redefine himself, where love and loyalty could coexist without destruction. As he contemplated his future, the decision crystallized in his mind, a stark contrast to the uncertainty that had plagued him. He could choose to break free from the cycle of violence, to step away from the inevitable darkness that surrounded him. But at what cost? The thought hung in the air, heavy and charged, as he turned to face her fully. If I do this, I need your promise. We'll face the fallout together, no matter what. I promise, she said, her voice unwavering. I'll stand by you. Antonio felt a surge of emotion as he realized the depth of their bond. They were two souls intertwined by circumstance, but now they were choosing to create their own destiny. The flickers of hope grew stronger, illuminating the shadows that had long clouded his judgment. Then I choose you, he declared, the words bursting forth with newfound conviction. I choose us. A smile spread across Isabella's face, and for the first time he could see a future unfurling before them, one filled with uncertainty, yes, but also with promise. As they stood together, hand in hand, they prepared to confront the storm ahead. With every step forward, they would write their own narrative together. Share your thoughts in the comments and turn on notifications for updates. Antonio could feel the bonds of his past beginning to loosen, and though the road ahead was fraught with danger, he finally felt ready to walk it. Together, they would carve a path out of the darkness, toward a future that belonged solely to them. As dawn began to break over the horizon, coloring the sky in soft pastels, Antonio and Isabella stood at the cusp of their new reality. The remnants of their past loomed like shadows in the light of the morning, threatening to engulf them in the weight of their decisions. They had spent the night discussing their future, mapping out the contours of what lay ahead, and now they faced the consequences of Antonio's choice with a palpable tension in the air. "Are you ready?" Isabella asked, her voice steady but laced with an underlying current of uncertainty. She looked into his eyes, seeking reassurance that he was prepared to confront both the remnants of his past and the unknown challenges of their future together. Antonio could see the flicker of doubt in her gaze, but there was also a fierce determination that drew him closer to her. "Ready as I'll ever be," he replied, his voice firm despite the storm brewing within. He reached for her hand, squeezing it gently to convey the strength he hoped to embody. "We've come this far. There's no turning back now." The warmth of her skin against his grounded him, reminding him of the bond they had forged through chaos and fear. They were no longer just survivors of their circumstances, they were partners defining their own path. He had chosen her, and with that choice came an overwhelming sense of responsibility. As they prepared to step into the day, Antonio couldn't shake off the feeling that the Mafia would not let them go easily. He had made his declaration, but the fallout from his decision echoed louder than his words. The ties that bound him to his past were frayed but still present, and the uncertainty of his next move gnawed at him like a persistent ache. "Where do we start?" Isabella asked, breaking through his thoughts. They had yet to devise a plan, and the reality of their situation began to dawn on them. "We need to be smart about this. We can't just run away without a strategy." Antonio nodded, appreciating her pragmatism. "We'll need to lay low, at least for a while. I have contacts who might help us get out of the city, but first we need to gather some information." Isabella's brow furrowed as she considered the implications of his words. "Information about what? The Mafia will be looking for you, Antonio. They won't just let you walk away." "I know," he said, his tone deliberate, "but I need to understand what they're planning. They won't accept my decision without a fight. I need to know if they intend to retaliate." As he spoke, the weight of the past pressed heavily upon him. The very thought of facing his former allies, men he had trusted and fought alongside, filled him with dread. He now stood on the precipice of a choice that could shatter the fragile peace they had fought to establish. "Then we move quickly," Isabella replied, her resolve hardening. "I'll help you however I can. We can't let fear dictate our lives anymore." Her unwavering support imbued him with a renewed sense of strength. They would not be mere pawns in a game that had already taken too much from them. They were determined to take control, to shape their destiny, no matter the cost. After a brief exchange of strategy, they made their way through the city streets, the dawn casting long shadows and illuminating the path ahead. Antonio's heart raced as he navigated familiar alleys, his past trailing behind him like a ghost. Every corner turned felt like a reminder of the life he had led, but each step alongside Isabella also felt like a move toward reclaiming his identity. As they approached a discreet cafe that served as a meeting point for Antonio's old contacts, he felt a mixture of apprehension and excitement. "Stay close," he instructed Isabella, unsure of how their presence would be received. The very act of entering this space was akin to stepping into the lion's den, and they needed to tread carefully. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with unspoken tension, the clinking of coffee cups mingling with low murmurs. Antonio spotted a familiar face in the corner booth, Giovanni, a trusted ally who had remained in the shadows as Antonio ascended the ranks. As their eyes met, a flicker of recognition passed between them, but all the warmth of their previous camaraderie had turned to suspicion. "Antonio," Giovanni greeted, his voice low. "I didn't expect to see you here again. What brings you back?" Antonio could feel Isabella's anxiety radiating from her, but he steadied himself, drawing upon the confidence he had cultivated. "I'm looking for information, Giovanni. I need to understand what's happening. I can't allow them to destroy what I've built." The gravity of his words hung heavily in the air, and Giovanni's expression shifted from suspicion to something akin to pity. "You know they won't let you go easily. You're in deeper than you realize." The words struck a chord within Antonio, a reminder of the chains of loyalty that still bound him, but he refused to let fear dictate his life any longer. "I'm prepared to face the consequences. I want out, Giovanni. I want to protect Isabella, and I need your help to do that." Giovanni's gaze flickered to Isabella, who stood resolutely beside Antonio, her presence a beacon of strength amidst the uncertainty. "Fine," he relented, leaning in closer. "But know that if you're making this choice, you need to be ready for war. They won't see your decision as anything other than betrayal." As Isabella and Antonio exchanged determined glances, a shared understanding passed between them. They were bound not just by love, but by their commitment to confront the darkness together. "We're ready," Isabella affirmed, her voice steady. The intensity of the moment settled on them like a thick fog, and as they were thrust into the perilous depths of their situation, Antonio felt a flicker of hope. They would not be victims of their circumstances any longer. Together, they would forge their own narrative, even if it meant facing the storm head-on. Share your thoughts in the comments and turn on notifications for updates. With newfound clarity, Antonio felt the scars of his past begin to reshape into a source of strength, fueling the fire of determination within as they prepared to face whatever lay ahead. As dawn broke over the horizon, casting a soft, golden hue across the city, Antonio and Isabella found themselves at a crossroads in their lives. The weight of their respective pasts hung heavily in the air, yet a sense of unspoken understanding bound them. They had faced the darkness together, and now they were ready to embrace whatever lay ahead. They stood at the edge of a small rooftop overlooking the bustling streets below, the sounds of the city awakening from its slumber filling the silence between them. The moment felt surreal, as if time itself had paused to allow them to bask in the buoyant yet fragile hope that had begun to blossom in their hearts. Antonio turned to Isabella, his expression a mixture of determination and vulnerability. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" he mused, memories of their harrowing journey flooding his mind. Their connection had been forged in the fires of danger and uncertainty, yet it had emerged as something profound and unbreakable. Isabella nodded, her eyes reflecting a resilience that belied her earlier fears. "We have," she agreed, her voice steady. "And no matter what challenges come our way, we'll face them together." Her words ignited a flicker of warmth in Antonio's chest, a reminder that he was not alone in this fight. As they prepared to descend from the rooftop, Antonio felt a moment of clarity wash over him. The scars of his past, once sources of shame and remorse, were now markers of his strength and transformation. He had chosen a path not just for himself, but for Isabella as well, and that bond had become his guiding light. Their descent back into the heart of the city was filled with a newfound sense of purpose. With each step they took, the air around them crackled with the anticipation of what was to come. They had decided to confront the remnants of Antonio's old life, the shadows that loomed ominously over their future. Later that day, they found themselves in a dimly lit room, a place once filled with whispered schemes and clandestine meetings. The atmosphere was thick with tension, reminiscent of past dealings that had long since lost their sheen of glamour. The stark reality of the life Antonio had led pressed down upon him, but he stood resolute, determined to reclaim his narrative. As they entered, several familiar faces turned towards them, a mix of surprise and skepticism evident in their expressions. Among them was Giovanni, who had been Antonio's closest confidant during the darkest days of his rise in the underworld. However, this time, the dynamic had shifted, and the trust that once bound them was now tainted by the choices Antonio had made. "Antonio," Giovanni began, his voice steady yet laced with an edge of caution. "I didn't expect you to return, especially not with her." His gaze flickered toward Isabella, who stood beside Antonio, her presence a pillar of strength. Antonio took a deep breath, his heart pounding in his chest. "I'm here to end this," he declared, the conviction in his voice resonating with the weight of his decision. "I can't continue to live in the shadows of my past, and I won't let it define our future." Giovanni opened his mouth to respond, but Antonio held up a hand, cutting him off. "I'm done playing their games. I'm ready to face the consequences of my choices, whatever they may be. Isabella deserves that, and so do I." The room was silent, the air thick with unspoken words. Antonio could feel the weight of their collective scrutiny, the echoes of past alliances ringing in his ears. But alongside that weight, he also felt a surge of hope, a belief that he was stepping into a new era, one defined by agency and partnership rather than fear. Isabella glanced up at him, her expression unwavering. "We're both ready to leave this behind," she added, her voice steady and clear. "It's time to break free from the chains of a life that has only brought pain and suffering." Giovanni exchanged glances with the others, the internal conflict evident on his face. "You realize they won't just let you go, right?" he finally said, his tone softer. "You'll be making powerful enemies, and there's no going back." "I know," Antonio replied, his voice firm. "But I'd rather face the consequences of my own choices than be a puppet in someone else's game. I owe it to Isabella, and I owe it to myself. We're ready to fight for our freedom." The tension in the room shifted slightly. A collective understanding began to form. They may not fully agree with Antonio's decision, but there was a sense of respect for his resolve. It was the first step toward reclaiming their lives, and a flicker of hope ignited among them. Antonio turned to Isabella, their eyes locking in a moment of unbreakable connection. "No matter what happens, we'll face it together," he assured her, feeling the warmth of her hand clasping his. As they prepared to leave, Antonio felt a surge of determination filling the space where fear had once resided. They were no longer just surviving. They were ready to live, to carve out a future that was truly theirs. The path ahead would undoubtedly be fraught with challenges, but they were united in their resolve. Share your thoughts in the comments and turn on notifications for updates. With a shared glance of understanding, they stepped into the unknown, ready to embrace the tumultuous journey ahead with unwavering hearts. They would not just be victims of their pasts, they would become the architects of their destinies, forging a new narrative in a world that had nearly consumed them.